MIT scientists at the Monsanto Tribunal in The Hague, Netherlands, and we just heard some very moving, disturbing, and amazing testimony from about 3 different parties, some mothers, farmers, and many different people. Could you tell us about what was your reaction to the testimonies?
I was so touched by these testimonies, especially the women who spoke from the heart about their own personal experiences with their children that suffered, and also the older woman who had the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and all that she went through. And what was especially striking was that glyphosate was really the only thing that could have explained what was going on with these people in terms of the way the setup was and what they were seeing. And so often it's the case that they're talking about, oh, there's all these other chemicals. It wasn't the glyphosate, it was something else. Here, there was no something else. And that is so strong and so compelling. And my heart goes out to the mothers who have these children with so many problems with all the operations, the esophagus not developing correctly, exact timing in terms of when the glyphosate exposure was during development. I don't see how anyone in a jury listening to this could possibly believe that something else was what caused it. It really points to the glyphosate, and it really points out that glyphosate is far more toxic to humans than we've been led to believe.
So there were many different parties that said that different things actually happened to them, like esophageal formations or birth defects, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and also
kidney failure,
kidney disease.
Yes.
How can you, as a scientist, as an expert who has studied glyphosate for nearly 9 years now, how can you explain that the changes are so different in different people?
It's easy to explain. It's easy to explain once I realized that glyphosate gets into proteins by mistake in place of glycine. This is a really huge aspect of glyphosate's effects, and it's pervasive, cumulative, insidious, that as you get more and more exposure, you get more and more retention in various proteins in your body. And depending upon which proteins are affected, it will affect you differently. And so it also depends on where the glyphosate goes in your body. And so when you're getting the kidney failure, the glyphosate is obviously going to the kidneys, and it's carrying toxic metals into the kidneys. And then in that acidic environment, it lets them loose, and then the metals also start attacking the kidneys on top of the glyphosate. So I believe I understand the mechanisms for all of them, actually. The non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is because glyphosate goes into the bone marrow and disrupts the stem cells that are the precursors to these cells that become the lymphoma. So the blood cells come out of the bone marrow, constantly being replenished and developing new ones coming out of these stem cells. And those stem cells are being soaked in glyphosate because it's going into the bone marrow.
So they're not coming out functioning normally.
That's right.
So
they're
they develop into lymphoma.
Slowly getting attacked, and there's specific proteins, in fact, involved in maintaining a protection from DNA mutations, and DNA mutations are what eventually lead to cancer. So those proteins have essential glycines that get disrupted by glyphosate, which then means that the protective mechanism that keeps the cancer away is no longer working properly. We've written about that in our paper on cancer. Anthony and I described that process. And in terms of the kidney failure, there's big issues with metals, even iron. Iron becomes both toxic and deficient in the kidneys simultaneously due to the effect of glyphosate getting into proteins by mistake in place of glycine. Different proteins.
Some people say that this is crazy, that glyphosate could substitute as a glycine in the proteins, and it sort of slips inside of the protein. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
And then causes it to malfunction.
That's right, exactly.
So why would somebody think this is crazy, and why would you say that it's definitely not?
Yeah, I don't know why people think it can't happen, because it clearly can. There's absolutely no reason why it couldn't work in the protein structure. For example, proline, glyphosate has an additional attachment to its nitrogen. Some people might say that would prevent it from working, but proline is a coding amino acid that also has a carbon attached to the nitrogen. It works fine. So that does not stop glyphosate from getting in. And furthermore, there are multiple examples of other non-coding amino acids that are natural, that are produced by species as a defense against their enemies. And these are also substituting for other amino acids. So glyphosate is just one of many examples. I have at least 5.
So this happens normally in nature in other ways?
Yes, people know all about these other things. There's A's and BMAA, there's glufosinate, there's L-cannabinine, these are all examples of non-coding amino acids that are naturally produced. Glyphosate is not naturally produced.
And did
That's
you
the only
mention
difference.
that Monsanto, sorry to speak over you, but I'm excited about, you mentioned before that Monsanto knows this is happening because it's how they make the plants actually defend themselves from glyphosate. They actually put an alanine or something?
Well, they don't put it. It actually, the nature put it. So it's very, very interesting because if I'm a scientist looking at the way glyphosate works to poison the plants, which is this shikimate pathway, and this is a specific enzyme, EPSPS, in the pathway that glyphosate disrupts. They know that, and that's been well studied. There are many papers. What's extremely interesting is that multiple microbes, including E. coli, which is a very common one in our gut, have developed a strategy to protect themselves from glyphosate, because they also have the shikimate pathway, and they protect themselves by getting rid of a glycine at the active site. They take it out in the code and they replace it with alanine. And when they do that, they become completely resistant to glyphosate at any level. And the study has gone up to very, very high levels of glyphosate, no effect.
Wow.
Once the glycine is gone. So to me, that is incredibly compelling evidence. And you'd have to be an idiot not to see that.
And that's pathogenic gut bacteria that then signals to the
Yes.
brain that there's pathogenic gut bacteria here. And so then the immuno cells in the brain make glutamate often, which is an excitotoxin and can
Yes.
affect the brain.
That's right. And what's interesting to me, what I'm thinking now is that you can get, I think Klebsiella is another one, E. coli, you can get, if you get a mutant version in your gut, that version is going to take over your gut because everything else is being killed by the glyphosate.
Right.
But that one's fine. So it'll just flourish and overgrow and cause disease.
That makes sense. Now, what about the birth defects? They said that that there's
Yes.
esophageal birth defects in one child and another had other birth defects. How could
Very
it be causing
interesting, and
birth
actually
defects?
that was new information to me. I had known that there were many different kinds of disorders in the children that were being born in Argentina. I was not aware of the specific esophageal problem, which both mothers talked specifically about that, and it's a specific stage in development when that part of your body is being formed if you're exposed. In both cases, it was an exposure at a particular point in pregnancy. So
Yeah, they said they were about 3 to 4 weeks pregnant.
Yes, they said they know exactly when. That's a really fascinating thing about development. I learned that with thalidomide many, many years ago. I was so fascinated when exactly when you got the drug, that determined what kind of problem you had in those thalidomide babies that were born without arms and legs and things. But so this was very interesting to me, especially because I know I've written about how glyphosate can affect the esophagus and cause it to be too hard and sort of make it the wrong changes the whole way the esophagus develops to make it much too hard. And this is because of another enzyme, a protein called KEAP1, KEAP1, which hooks to the membrane. It hooks to the cytoskeleton of the cell using glycine. And if that glycine gets replaced by glyphosate, it won't hook. And when it doesn't hook, all kinds of different signals change in the cell towards becoming hard, becoming like scales.
Oh,
So the esophagus becomes too hard and inflexible, and that would be, I suspect, I haven't looked at exactly what the disorder is with these children. But
I'm sure you would like to talk to her.
I definitely want to find out more.
yeah. So she's mentioned her son is now on his 51st surgery.
It's so horrendous to think about. And
Very
the poor
disturbing.
woman who had the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and has gone through such hell.
Lost her farm and
Everything, lost everything. And
Yeah.
of course, she's in physical pain constantly now. Still alive, miraculously, but what kind of a life, you know?
well, it's amazing to me that you have looked at the science and can connect and see why all these things are happening, and we hope that the judges will also be able to understand some of this information. Will you somehow be able to get information to them?
I don't know. That's a
Yeah.
good question to ask, and I should really try to figure out if I could.
Yeah, that would be great if you could submit some studies to them. I appreciate your time and all your research that you've done, and your fortitude under the attacks that you've had coming
That's
after
part of the game.
Yeah, I know you're going to keep going.
I
Thanks for
will.
being an unstoppable scientist.
Thank you.